Please give a warm welcome to Academy Award nominee Vanessa Kirby. Thank you for joining us, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.
I love the fact that she gets the last words. It's the last voice we hear in the film, and then, you know, the last words of him. Why do you think that after they parted, she didn't read his letters?
She didn't read. Say that again.
I mean, the letters that he would send to her, he would not read them.
Yes. Oh, especially at the beginning.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in love with their story, and I urge anyone to read books about it and go and read their letters, because it's fascinating. I always found it so fascinating, the letters particularly. They're the sort of most famous thing about their relationship. Many of hers were destroyed, as in the film. But with his, you know, you have this military commander who's out there, you know, very intellectual and strategist, incredibly in the head, and then suddenly he's running back to his tent and he's writing these extremely flowery and kind of obsessive letters. And at the time, at the beginning of their relationship, she barely replied.
When we first see her, I mean, she had lived many lives. When we first saw her at the beginning, at the top of the film, you know, it looks like she's getting ready to die. And what was it like to perform? I mean, to be her at that point in her life, that she's like ready to give up everything, and then she meets Napoleon.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I felt about her. Is that she was someone who quite literally had 6 completely different lives. Her history was so extraordinary. I kept saying to Ridley, you need to do a 20-hour series on this person. not with me in it necessarily, but no, her whole life was so fascinating. We did actually film a long prison sequence the movie was far too long for cinema, but there was a long sequence of her in prison, because she was this young, she was 16 when she came over from a tiny island called Martinique in the Caribbean, and she got on a boat to Paris. She decided to marry this, you know, someone in her family, distant member, had set her up with this aristocrat that she married, and he kept her at home. She had 2 children, she was barely allowed out, and then they were both imprisoned. And during that time, and then her husband was beheaded 5 days before she was due to, and she was released 24 hours before she was going to be beheaded. So you're so right, she came, it always felt to me that this is somebody who had come so close to death and had really been on the, you know, had experienced mortality, not in just the person, you know, the father of her children, having his head cut off in front of her, but also knowing that that was about to be her fate before she was released. So the sort of phrase, survivor's rage, always came to me. And I thought, that's someone that has got that inside of her no matter what. Mm-hmm. So, and for that reason, I so admired her resilience and her kind of intense, sort of quiet strength.
Her hair is shorn at the beginning. Is that why? Because she was preparing to have her head cut off? Exactly
right, yeah. All the women, and there was a scene actually we filmed where we talked about in the prison, they used to cut their hair very short because the hair would get stuck in the blade. So, I mean, that's how radically sort of close to death that, you know, she came. And there was a scene we filmed where she kind of hacked off all her hair. And when the scene isn't in the movie, I always used to think, maybe the audience is going to think she just loved that haircut. I thought it was just a cool haircut, but no, it's because she cut it off with very blunt scissors.
I love the fact that you bring up the fact that she came from the Caribbean. There is a sensuality and a movement to what you bring to the character that reminded me of the Caribbean. Am I jumping to conclusions, the sensuality of the character?
I'm so touched you picked up on that, because I really wanted to be mindful of that. At home, I printed out lots of pictures of Martinique and what it looked like in those times, and all these kind of paintings of it at the time. And I just imagined that this was somebody who, and there's lots of descriptions of her in all these different books, of her being from a real tropical environment, very hot. She actually lost most of her teeth because they all sucked sugarcane on that island. So I did actually wear a kind of mouth guard, but she never...
And that's why, like, you barely smile. I mean, you smile, but we don't see her teeth.
Her teeth, exactly. Because it was kind of, in every book I read, she was so self-conscious of her teeth. So she always kept her mouth closed, even when she was, smiling.
And why do you think that she agreed to Napoleon's advances? Was it a strategic move on her part, or she had lost everything and here comes Napoleon?
Yes, because it's unconventional, isn't it? And he's not someone that you would instantly go for, I don't think. She was known for being very, what's the word? God, I'm trying to find the word in my jet-lagged brain. Very strategic. And she was, when she got released from prison, and she was suddenly found herself at the center of this kind of women's movement, really. They redesigned fashion. She was at the epicenter of this new fashion revolution where women, instead of being all kind of corseted and buttoned up, they had, Janty Yates did an amazing job with the costumes. You kind of had the, dresses kind of really off the shoulder and a very, sometimes transparent. They were really kind of radical for their time, and they really set that new trend. And so she was at the time she was even with Tahar Rahim's character, Barras. She was having an affair with him and getting money for it. She was looking after her children that way, and she was incredibly in command, actually, of a lot of those men. I loved her because she was never a kind of supplicant. And then when Napoleon, Barras was the one actually that said, you should think about this young general because he's really on the up. And so she was aware of who he was, and he was adamant that it would be her. And it took her quite a while to accept his advances.
And I'm curious, I mean, you've brought up the fact that you did a lot of research into Josephine. We adore you as Margaret in The Crown. With her, you had footage of Margaret, you could hear her voice, you saw the way she moved. How does that compare to creating Josephine from just reading books and seeing paintings? Is one more freeing than the other, or one more enjoyable than the other?
It's definitely easier when you can see things. And we were blessed that we had these reels of very grainy archive footage, and a lot of it for The Crown, that was. Not from Josephine, someone invented. Should be clear. And I was really excited because I loved that process of playing a real person. It was just the biggest honour of my life, actually, playing Margaret. So I was really excited about it. But I think I took for granted there's a great radio program called Desert Island Discs, and the real Margaret did it, and she talked about her favourite songs, and it really gives you the idea of the nature of her personality. And there was also the footage that we did use for The Crown. It was all public facing, right? It was never private stuff that you got to see behind the scenes, which was The Crown was a lot of behind the scenes. So we had to look at this public footage and try and take something from it to be able to use in the private moments. And there was this one ceremony, it was like she was cutting the ribbon for something, Princess Margaret, and she has this really naughty look in her eye. And she goes off camera and she said something quite rude while she was still on mic, but didn't think she was on camera. And it was the best insight to her character. You know, those little moments where you can see into her, even it was very grainy and, you know, very old footage. With Josephine, I thought the experience would be as obviously illuminating as it was for Margaret. With Margaret, there were, you know, no matter what book you read, sometimes there were some brilliant, very salacious, tabloidy ones that really gave lots of stories about her, or there were some very dignified accounts from members, you know, who served in the royal family. But with Josephine, every book had a completely contradictory account of who she was. There was hardly any consistency in how they described her. And that became so challenging because kind of on book 7, I was suddenly going, oh my God, who is this person? Like, shit. You know, I'm gonna have to try and find a common thread between all these different versions of her. And there were, her lady-in-waiting wrote a very kind of deifying account. She hated Napoleon, and so she wrote this kind of saintly version of Josephine. Another one was very anti-Josephine because she had affairs and was very critical at the time of who she was. And so what it did teach me in the end was that this was somebody that had the ability to completely shape-shift according to which situation she was in and which phase of her life she was in and what she needed to be in order to survive and to ascend. And in a way, that mercurial nature I found really the most challenging in pretty much any character I played, because it feels very elusive and ephemeral, and like you can't, you know, Princess Margaret would have a cigarette and she'd put it out someone's lunch. Whereas Josephine was so, ephemeral that it was, I know that I needed to capture someone that had the ability to change quite dramatically depending on where she was.
You alluded earlier about the quality of her being an outsider, you know, and going up in the ranks. And Napoleon also obviously had that same quality. Do you think that that's what brought them together, that the two outliers?
I think that's exactly what it was. They were both from, as you say, small islands. They kind of came into this very cold, harsh Parisian society that was completely different from what they knew. And they were both independently determined to sort of make something of themselves. There's this amazing account that's recorded of her with 2 friends, and there were witnesses, where Josephine in Martinique went to see a palm reader. And the palm reader told her, I think she was 13 or something, that she was going to be greater than a queen. And she didn't really know what that meant. Her friends laughed about it. But she told people that when she became empress, she suddenly realized that that prophecy was true. Mm-hmm. And she told Napoleon about it. He was the only one she told before they got married. And he actually gave her a necklace that says Destin on it, which is destiny in French, because they believed that they had this strange joint destiny. So that's what we tried to capture in the movie, which was these 2 very strange personalities that can't seem to live without each other, even though it's not very functional.
Mm-hmm. There's 2 heartbreaking scenes that you perform beautifully. The one, the divorce, the signing. You know, can you walk us through shooting that scene? It's so heartbreaking to watch her sign away.
Yeah, sign away everything that she'd dedicated herself to for decades. I mean, Ridley works with 11 cameras sometimes. And so when you've got that many cameras in a room and the camera captures everything, so you might have 1 take. So I think we had 2 takes of that divorce scene. So you can't have a go and have a go and have a go. So you know, when you go on, you just have to feel what they would feel and hope for the best. Mm-hmm. And I guess I just learning about her and really feeling like, God, I owe this woman at least the responsibility of trying to tell her life in some small way faithfully. You know, I really cared about her. And the fact that as a woman in those times, not only to navigate and live the life and survive death many times. There was an assassination attempt that they both were nearly killed, particularly her, because the bomb went off right next to the carriage on her side. She also was being carried on the front lines of one of the sort of camps near one of the battles Napoleon was fighting, and she was being carried and they dropped her and she shattered her pelvis. There were so many times that she could have died and didn't, and kept going with this mad kind of strength and power. And I just thought, how humiliating to be, it's one thing, it's probably nerve-wracking enough to get married in front of a lot of people, but to get divorced when you are a very well-known public figure. And the reason for that divorce is because your body and your womb hasn't been able to procreate in the way that you are have intense pressure to do so, and it's not. And the weight of the sort of empire is quite literally on your body to do that. I just felt so sorry for her.
Yeah.
I felt so sorry for that as an experience. Really.
And on the similar line, you have the scene where he brings the baby over to you, and talk about heartbreaking and humiliating at the same time. And it's like showing your femininity in front of you, correct?
Yes, and your inability to do that. At the time, the doctors and the reports of the doctors, when she had in prison, they were all told that as women you had to get pregnant in prison because then you won't be beheaded. So they were really encouraged, and she was with many different men trying to get pregnant during that time and then didn't. But in the aftermath, when she had no way or no means, having come out of prison without with her husband having died, she was with a lot of different men, and at the time they used to use acid as a contraception. Acid on a sponge. I mean, can you imagine and that was apparently the reason for her infertility. So I thought a lot about, I guess just her, again, that ability to survive something and to know that that was the reason, to sense that that was the reason why now you couldn't, your body wouldn't do what you wanted it to do. I just thought, she must have been in so much pain emotionally. But I never wanted her to feel, I had so much respect for her, I never wanted her to feel...
like a victim? Or?
Yeah, mostly. All the way through, I never wanted her to feel like that.
The costumes are amazing. Yanti Yates, the costume designer, and I was watching your progression, the way that the costumes help, the trajectory, starts very humble, and then I notice a lot of golds and silver, and, and she starts wearing more jewelry. Can you tell us about working with her as a costume designer and help you, with the trajectory of the character?
Yes. Oh, we had the best time. In my life, I've never really had that ability to, I never really had a lot of natural style, naturally.
You look pretty stylish.
Although it doesn't actually fit that well. You can see at the back it's got to go. But I learned on The Crown, actually. It was the first time that I'd played a character who really cared about the artistry of clothes, and then it became an amazing process because suddenly you got to go on this journey with a costume designer, and you go through a sort of pseudo journey that Margaret would have gone on, right? Because she was having dresses made all the time, and she was very particular, and she was very bossy with them, and she was like, that colour and this, and I want this and that, and because she wore so many different clothes, and we got to go, I think she's having a really bad day. What would she put on if she felt like that? Something amazing, or something very dark and, very vivid about what she was feeling. And I learned how to use costume as a way to represent or portray some kind of inner feeling. So we got to do that with Josephine. It was such a pleasure because she really cared. And there's this other great part of her that's not that explored in the movie, where she was a mad shopaholic, and she bought thousands of pounds every week. Napoleon kept saying, please stop spending all the money, and she just couldn't stop. And I understood that, because I think there was a kind of, there was a hole inside of her, really, that she wanted to film, because she felt kind of, I don't think she ever felt fully fulfilled either in love or in her life. So so we had a great journey with the clothes, and we made tiny decisions that you would probably never notice, like the scene where she finds out, or she overhears, or Napoleon's told that he has got another woman pregnant. And so I decided I want her to wear blood red. You know, it was like the colour of these chairs, because I wanted her to feel like she could feel the idea of fertility even in the face of that. And there's tiny things that you'd never notice, but it's such a pleasure to go on that journey psychologically and using them, rather than just think, oh, it's like a heavy dress that's got a big,
The sex scenes are pretty powerful in the film. There is dynamics going on, politics and give and take with Napoleon. Was that difficult to shoot, those scenes?
Wasn't best. Yes, there was many conversations around it, and I know that Joaquin and Ridley talked a lot about how they wanted this man, rather than representing someone that was, so capable at this kind of, in military strategy, had achieved, more than anyone ever had, and was this great renowned commander, and they wanted to show somebody who was actually extremely incompetent at home. And I understood that. I wished that she would, I always wanted more affection as her, for her.
There was a bit of what's the word, infantilizing happening, with him.
Yeah, and it made me think how much women at that time wouldn't be able to truly express themselves, and she was notoriously very sensual as a person. I always wanted to kind of respect that about her, because, as you said, she came from this. I always used to think she reminds me of she has this kind of panther energy, just that kind of feline energy. And that was what I sort of picked up from the things that I read. And she also had this really wild affair with a 23-year-old. And again, I think there was another scene that perhaps isn't in the movie of her and Hippolyte, the 23-year-old, were running an arms business on the side, making quite a lot of money from trading arms across Europe, and she was doing all these strange, contradictory things. But their relationship, I think Napoleon always felt completely captivated by her. And to me, the biggest thing that I think unlocked it was, I thought to myself, I thought to myself, what was it about her that it meant his last word was Josephine, even though he had to divorce her, and they had a very tempestuous relationship. And I thought, I think it's because he can go out there and conquer all the lands that he has ever wanted, and he can't quite conquer this woman. He can't quite get her, because she's not that knowable in some ways.
Right. Yeah. And working with Joaquin, the two of you have incredible combustible, chemistry together. What was it like working with him?
Yeah, it was a complete pleasure. It was, he still says, I don't think we'll ever have quite understood what their relationship really was. It was one of those very complex and confusing relationships, because they just couldn't be separated, but a lot of times they didn't really like each other. And yet then it turned into some kind of love. I thought it was the most extraordinary journey for her, because she was really not very interested in him. And when he found out she was having an affair, his letters, that had been absolutely obsessive, you know, turned very cold. And he threw her out the house, and she was on her knees begging him not to do that. And then she promised him that she would be better. And then she committed to him wholeheartedly. And then he had lots of affairs with lots of women after that. It was never the same as it was. And she always tried to, but it's so bizarre, what a bizarre journey for it to turn into some kind of, we always said it was never a graph. It would have been easier if it had been a graph of like maturing, kind, you know, evolving love. And they got older and they realized, but it was always like this for them. And so it meant that in every scene, anything could sort of happen. You know, I didn't know Joaquin was going to climb under the table. That was a surprise, which is why you see me laughing in the scene. I didn't think I was going to laugh. They're discussing something extremely, you know, sort of devastating for her. But yeah, all those sort of various moments meant it was because there's sort of, oh, and then in the scene where we're on the sofa in the middle of the night, the editor reminded me, I couldn't remember this, she said we'd actually done a couple of 11-minute takes, and I couldn't remember doing them, but she said everything happened. You know, I screamed in his face, and he, you know, kissed, all sorts of things happened in that, because in a way their relationship was had so much in it, and yet was never clear.
Well, you mentioned that he shoots with 11 cameras and you only do a couple of takes. Was that exhilarating for you or nerve-wracking that you only do 2 takes? And did we get what was needed?
Always nerve-wracking. Nerve-wracking anyway, but I think with when you know you might only have 1 or 2 takes, you have to, like for example in the scene where she opens her legs, we did 2 takes of that, and I knew there were so many different ways of playing that. If it was, you know, Princess Margaret, she would have played it completely opposite, actually, and been, you know, God knows. But with her, I never wanted her to, I always wanted her to have dignity because of what she'd been through and the course of, you know, the journey in her life and the film. But we did 2 takes, and I thought, oh my goodness, you know, there was a part of me that thought if we'd have done 20 takes, how many other different versions of that would there have been? So you have to kind of commit to it, and then it's a bit like theatre because you don't have to be aware of where one camera is. They're all over, so you just have to go in there, do it, get off, change, on to the next, go do it. Oh.
And it's such an immense production. The sets are so sumptuous. What was it like for you to step in, walk into the set, and see how big all of it is?
It was incredible, and it was much like, you know, when we did the royal family and the crown, because you're working in these spaces that feel like the places. You don't have to imagine it so much in your mind. And then as her, you kind of get used to it when you're filming it. And then there are some moments where you'd get taken out of it and you suddenly look around. And I remember being in Malta shooting, and there was a sequence where she walks back from the prison, and it's a big square. I don't know if you see it in this version, and there was hundreds of extras, and they'd done loads of market stalls. It reminded me of like Zelda, that video game. You know, it just was, there was so many different elements to it, and people and work that had gone into it. And I had a real moment of going, I can't believe I'm on a Ridley Scott set. That's just wild. You know, I looked at the whole, you know, how much people, everyone, so many people had put into it, and it was, you have to always be grateful and always to remind yourself of those things, because it's a total privilege.
Yeah. Well, speaking of privileges, thank you for being here with us. We're big fans. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a big deal to give up a night before Christmas, and it's just, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.